welcome to 1880. We're really happy to have you here. The resident photographer, Ben, hosting this wonderful talk with us tonight with his two partners, Kwong Chi-min, Dr. Kwong Chi-min, who's going to be going over the history of the battle lines between the Japanese and the British here in Hong Kong, and Billy Potts, who's a co-founder of Hong Kong Ghost Signs. On behalf of 1880, we'd like to thank everyone for coming. If you have any questions about our venue, feel free to ask us. We're all around. Also, we're offering everyone who's attending tonight 20% off at Hoi Polloi, our restaurant downstairs, should you find yourself still hungry after the talk. Yeah, leave it to you guys.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Nadia. And thank you to 1880 for hosting us tonight, for providing this really lovely, warm space, and the opportunity to come here and share our stories with all of you. And thank you, everyone, for taking time out of your week to come here on a rainy Wednesday night. We're really super fortunate to have your support, and hope that we can share some nice stories with you tonight, let you know about some of the work that we're doing, and give you an opportunity to maybe share some of your own stories or ask some questions as we go forward. I'm very fortunate. My name is Ben Marans. I'm a photographer and a photojournalist in Hong Kong. I've been living here about 6.5 years, and I am a co-founder of Hong Kong Ghost Signs. Joined this evening by two of my esteemed colleagues. To my right, immediately to my right, is Billy Potts. Billy is a designer, journalist, a writer, an enthusiast for Hong Kong history and culture, born and raised in Hong Kong, and is co-founder of Hong Kong Ghost Signs, which we'll dive into in a little bit. And then to my far right, the very impressive and very handsome Dr. Kwong Chi-min, who's a professor at Hong Kong Baptist University in the history department. And he is a foremost expert on the Battle of Hong Kong, and of many things that went on in this area and the city in this region during World War II. And he's going to share some of his work and some of the stories with you tonight. If at any point anyone has any questions or wants clarification on something, by all means, feel free to raise your hand or yell at us or whatnot. We're happy to entertain that. Cool? Everyone can hear me? Good. Let's go. There we go. So I am keenly aware that I am the one non-Hong Konger sitting up here in front of you all. I'm from Canada. I've been here about 6.5 years. And I've actually been in this neighborhood for all of that time, and have fallen in love with Quarry Bay, in particular, Pan Hoi Street. And this is where my journey into what we're going to talk about tonight very much started. This is an image of Pan Hoi Street from, I should have marked it down, probably about a year ago or so. This is just across the street from us. This side of the road no longer exists. It's a big hole. It's a big construction site. In advance of it being a hole in a construction site slated for redevelopment, was full of shops, a blacksmith shop, a hardware store, a flower shop, a recycling depot, a Joss paper shop, veggie stalls. And since I landed in Hong Kong, I have traversed this street probably every day for the last 6.5 years. And really gotten to know the people that lived on this street, who built it, who ran their businesses there, who raised their families there, and who made it their home and their community. Learning and they taught me the concept of kaifeng, of community, and the importance of that. And I really fell in love with this area in the street. Then learning that it would be redeveloped. And wanting to take the time to document these stories, and to capture some of the images and stories and history of this place. In particular was Lock Key Hardware Store. In the bottom left here is my friend Marco Young, who ran the hardware store that his mom and dad started. They have been here. They had been in this neighborhood for more than 40 years. His parents moved into the area, started a little blacksmith shop, and then moved down the road to a hardware store. They were property managers, essentially, for the tenants up above, and a family that knew everyone in the area. I used to jokingly call him the king of Panhoy Street because he just seemed to know everyone and know lots of the local lore. He was raised here. He was doing his homework on the street. He was playing in this area. And then he raised his kids here too. On the far right are the height measurement of his two little daughters as they grew up in the hardware store here. And this, I was really drawn in. I was very fortunate to get to know this family, to be welcomed to their Mid-Autumn Fest barbecues, and also to get his good advice on buying materials to fix up my flat and whatnot. But as I got to know them, I really wanted to understand more about their situation and what was going on and their role in the neighborhood. And I documented it for a number of months, including when their store closed and when the sign was taken down. They pulled off the characters, they sold off the belongings inside, and they closed down shop and moved along. And it was, kind of an emotional event for me, I think, more so, maybe more so than them, to see that sort of disappear and to know that they would be moving on and the fabric of the neighborhood would change. Change isn't necessarily a bad thing. These things occur. But I feel very fortunate to have been able to work with them and to be by their side, just kind of document their story and capture their legacy and really understand it. My endeavor to do that really brought me to the gentleman to my right, Billy Potts. And this is kind of the genesis story, if you will, of Hong Kong ghost signs. That I had met Billy through some mutual friends and really wanted to capture stories of this street. My Cantonese is subpar, if not non-existent. And so, I needed someone that could help with interviews, with documenting, with capturing these stories, and reached out to Billy for that. And very grateful that he helped me through that. And then introduced me to the concept of ghost signs, which is a project that we have been working on for the past 4 years, and part of the reason why you're all here today. So, without further ado, I'm going to pass the mic to Billy to talk to you a bit more about ghost signs.
Right. So I think a good place to start here would be to talk about what a ghost sign actually is, and I'm sure most of you know, given that you've signed up for this talk, but let's do this and talk about why we feel it's important to define it. So basically, a ghost sign is a defunct sign. But this definition, it's not complete. There are many different definitions from all over the world, and this concept is not unique to Hong Kong. It actually comes from the US and the UK and Europe. And so, of course, their built environment is very, very different to ours. We use different materials. Our rate of redevelopment is different. Our climate is different. The way that we make signs is different. And so, we are definitely going to have a very different breed of ghost sign to everyone else. Now, other people have said that a ghost sign is only a painted sign on a brick wall. But I think we'd be hard-pressed to find a brick wall in Hong Kong, much less a painted sign. That's a very Eurocentric definition. So what we've decided is that a ghost sign in Hong Kong is any material on any surface as long as the original context has been changed. The original person who put that sign up could never have intended for us to either see this sign or to see it in the condition that it is in. So that's what we've arrived at after much deliberation. So what we found with ghost signs, that you might say it's a very niche sort of area to look at. Faded signs and signage itself is already fascinating. But why does this concern anybody who isn't an aficionado in graphic design or sign making? Well, the fact is that ghost signs tell the story of everybody. There is an entry point for practically anybody with any kind of interest or any kind of background, because ghost signs are a reflection of our society. So they can be big, they can be institutions or businesses that we all know well, such as Jumbo, for instance, that everybody practically knows this one. This is a landmark for Hong Kong, one might argue internationally famous as well, and now, of course, a ghost sign. And just as a reflection of how fast changing the landscape is, we've been told that this sign is actually gone now. We haven't been able to verify this because we haven't had a chance to go out and look. But yes, this is a story of Hong Kong on the international stage, Hong Kong to tourism, but also Hong Kong to locals. It can be very minor stories. This sign appeared in Happy Valley one day when a seafood restaurant went out of business or moved on, and their sign came down. And what was revealed underneath was a beautiful hand-painted sign. What is it for? It's actually very, very humble. It's just the sales office for this building. When this building was completed, they opened the sales office for the units inside on the ground floor. And it's just the way it was at the time. They got somebody to make this beautiful hand-painted sign simply to sell off the units. And when they were all sold, they just covered it up because it wasn't valuable. It wasn't considered valuable. It was very ordinary. And now it's gone again because it's underneath a sign for a Kaibo supermarket. And we won't be seeing this sign again probably until that Kaibo supermarket decides that it doesn't want to renew its lease for one reason or another. And it can be stories about Hong Kong and the way that it interacts with Western pop culture. I mean, needless to say, this kindergarten did not have a licensing agreement with Disney. Like knowing Disney, cease and desist letters are being drafted as we speak. But here we are with Donald Duck or Huey, Louie, or Dewey. And Mickey, and there were many, many others as well. And you see them paired with the calligraphic script known as clerical script, which is favored by all sorts of educational institutions, even this august kindergarten. It just goes to show that signs in Hong Kong, they have their own language, and they tell us stories that are, other than what is literally being said on the sign. What they are trying to communicate to us by choosing this particular script, which is called Daishu, is that they are a respected and old institution. You can trust them with your children. It is essentially the Hong Kong equivalent of saying ye old such and such. So it's ye old kindergarten. And then there are stories told to us by things like this photography studio in, was it Shao Kei Wan or Sai Wan Ho? Sai Wan Ho. Ben and I actually found that there were many photography studio ghost signs in Sai Wan Ho and Shao Kei Wan. And we couldn't tell exactly why. And we spoke with our friends at Street Sign HK, Ken and Kevin. And they suggested that it might be because cameras were expensive. This was a working class neighborhood. It still is, mostly. And cameras just weren't a thing that families had. It would have been a wonderful day out and an occasion to go have the family's photo taken, or your passport photo taken, or your wedding photos taken. It would have been special. Hence why it's important that the sign should be beautiful. And this is also an indication of how important it is for us to work with other experts in the field. Ken and Kevin at Street Sign HK have been incredibly helpful and supportive in our endeavors, and as have many other similarly minded experts. And not all ghost signs are old either. Well, I say this relatively speaking because in my mind, this is very new because I was a teenager in the 2000s, and this was current in the 2000s. This is in a shopping mall in Sham Shui Po called Dragon Center. And within Dragon Center, if anybody knows, there is a roller coaster. There's a roller coaster that went around the top floors. That roller coaster doesn't go anymore, mainly because there were a couple accidents in the States. Not with this one, nothing wrong with this one. And it creepily still does come out from time to time just for testing, because the roller coaster is supposed to be still licensed. So it looks like it's a roller coaster for ghosts, but it's not. But you see the signs which they've put up, they're not fancy. They're made of vinyl. They're stuck on. By any graphic designer's measure, they're not attractive. The color choice is questionable. But these are the sorts of things that actually delight us over here at Hong Kong Go Signs. And then there are things which we see all the time. Everybody walks past these, and very few people will know what they are. They just kind of live in the periphery of our lives. So these are popularly known as little houses or tiny houses. And what they are is they are an indication. They're a wayfinding sign for a water mains valve. This is for the water supplies department. And these signs are now completely defunct because in 1998, they digitized this record, which of course means these hand-painted signs, which we see everywhere on the street, they have no purpose or function anymore. But they still communicate what they're pointing at. So this sign here, for instance, the numbers up top and down below will indicate what kind of valve we're dealing with. The arrow there will be pointing at where that valve is, and the color black indicates that this is for drinking water. If the tiny house was yellow, that would indicate that it's a saltwater pipe for flushing. If the house was red, then that would indicate that it is water for a fire hydrant. So there is meaning everywhere if you want to read the story, which is written on our walls all over our streets.
One of the things as well that has been awesome about Hong Kong Go Signs and teaching people about these is the accessibility. You don't need to go into a museum to see these. You don't need to go into a specific neighborhood. They're in almost every neighborhood throughout Hong Kong. These three signs are all within about 100 meters of where we're sitting right now, throughout Quarry Bay. And so it's been this sort of delightful thing to explore neighborhoods and find these things throughout and know that anyone can just kind of track these down and see them.
Yeah, and then sometimes they're spectacular. This one, for instance, has a very action-packed backstory. This shop, which many people will be familiar with, it's next to Le Caban on Hollywood Road. It's a sugarcane juice and herbal tea shop. And one night, somebody managed to crash their sports car into the corner of this building. Normally, I would be very sad and upset with this person, not because they wrecked their Ferrari or whatever, but because they destroyed a ghost sign carved into the stone. That sign actually told us the name of the architecture or decoration firm that did the work on that building and the date on which it was completed. However, when he cracked that stone off, it revealed something underneath, and that was an old terrazzo sign. And from that, we can see one character, Fa, which can mean many things in Chinese. It can mean to emit or it can mean to evolve. It very much depends on what other characters are with it. However, digging into it, and this is an indication of the kind of research that we go into, we found that this building was built in the 20s, and it has only had 2 occupants on that ground floor. Interestingly, the top floor was occupied by Wai'an College, so we know that. And so pre-war, there was only one tenant. Afterwards, this sugarcane juice sugarcane juice shop moved in. So we can account for all the time before that. And before that, it was a bookshop called Soiman Books. And it wasn't just any ordinary bookshop. It used to sell banned books. It used to sell illegal books, books that the British didn't want people reading. Were they anti-British books? No, they were actually anti-Chinese books. But the British, being very pragmatic, knew that if people were causing trouble for China right up there, then it would be trouble for them too. Hence, crush that. So what this was it was a place where you could buy books by people like Lu Xun, who would be recognized today as the father of modern-day Chinese literature. He basically told us it's okay to write in vernacular Chinese. And you would go in there and you would tell the bookseller quietly that you want that book, and then you would go around the block and he'd have it ready for you to surreptitiously take away. So these are quite spectacular stories, actually, that get unearthed. So how do we find these? I mean, we through all sorts of methods, sometimes by accident. The ways in which we find out where these signs came from, sometimes people literally just step forward and say, my family paid for that, my family financed that, or I used to live there, or I knew the person there. Quite often, I've passed by shops which are completely gone, shut up, and then the guys who run the market stalls next to it just are fighting each other to tell me the story of the rice merchant, because they've been dying to tell this tale the whole time. So a really good one is this sign in Wan Chai for a fortune teller. His name is Mo Xin, and I actually tracked this story down with the help of my mom, who's sitting here now, and she drove the getaway car. But we can see from this sign that Mo Xin's written his name there in the middle. He's felt that it's very important to tell us that he's from Shanghai. What a Shanghainese person, we always want to tell people. And he's also written that he's a fortune teller. And so, what can we find out from this is just a piece of writing on the side of the road. So I typed in his name on Google, expecting to get absolutely nothing. This was after I snuck into the building with the help of my mom. I waited outside until somebody went in, and then I followed them in like a creep. And I went up to the floor and the unit where he would have been, and found that it had been subdivided. So he's definitely not there anymore. It's definitely a ghost sign. He's not in there reading people's fortunes, not in corporeal form at least. So I typed in his name in Google, and amazingly, it came back with a result. And the result was a scanned page of this newspaper in the CUHK archive. It was an ad which he'd put out himself, given pretty much the same details that he put up on the sign. His name, that he's from Shanghai, very important, and that he tells fortunes. He also tells us exactly where he is, because underneath he gives directions as to where his apartment is. He tells us that he's next to the Gulf gas station. And then we find this photograph on a Facebook group from 1972 or 73 of this Gulf gas station. And then right behind that tram, we see the sign when it was brand new. The red is still vivid. And from this, we can basically see that he was at least there from 1972. And then, because of Hong Kong's various obsessions and preoccupations, that is business, money, and property, we have really great records on all of these things. And it's such a boon to us. It's, believe it or not, something that not everybody has. And so by simply looking at a real estate agent's site, or looking at the lands registry, or looking at the company's registry, we can find out when a person started a business, or when a building came up. So we can see that Mo Xin's building came up in 1969. So he could potentially have been there all the way from the beginning in 1969. But we know for sure from the photograph and from the newspaper that he was there at least from 1972.
Sometimes Google searches are not enough, and we seek out the experts. which brings us to the gentleman over on our far right.
Why are you using this photo? Anyway,
He just likes this photo greatly. I think it's fantastic.
I'm sorry about this photo. We will move on quickly, but I have to start with the story first. So I met Ben and Billy because so they approached me. Thanks. they sort of approached me, or I approached you guys first. I don't know. I forgot. Anyway, so you guys asked me to bring you guys to Shing Mun Redoubt because there was lots of ghost signs there. So this was part of the Shing Mun Redoubt. It was a British fortification built in the 1940s next to the Shing Mun Reservoir. So it was deserted for, well, right after the war, for 80 years or so. And we went there, so we have different purposes. So Billy and Ben want to take pictures of all these signs. But I have a question myself. So back in the time when we met, I actually was trying to write the explanation panel text for the Agriculture and Fisheries Department. So now the panels are there, so you can see the explanations of what these things are. But I have a question that has to be solved. The typeface of these words. They were crafted in sometime between 1938 to 1940, when the Middlesex Regiment was garrisoning in this area. So they were from London. So they look like a tube sign, London tube sign to me. But I'm not sure what kind of typeface they are using. So that's why I asked, especially Billy, who is the expert on design, and I asked what these typeface, the fonts are. They could be transport or ministry, that kind of stuff, but I wasn't very sure. So that's why I brought them to the site and have them have a look and have Ben take all these photos. I didn't, but he asked me to take that post photos. That's not what I like. Anyway, what brought us together is the attempts to look at different layers of history in Hong Kong. Ben just said one thing, so you don't really have to go to museum if you want to know more about Hong Kong history, because Hong Kong itself, the urban space, is one museum. The layers and layers of things like dirt on a teapot where you can simply see from tiny bits of information to the whole historical buildings or monuments. So for example, this was one of the entrances of the Shing Mun Redoubt. The video shown on the left was a clip, I think it was taken in 1939 when the British Indian troops were doing training. So they made many NGs, okay? It was meant for propaganda. So when those people were there, when it was being used for its original purpose, and that was taken, I think, 3 years ago, 2 years ago. So nothing changed much, except, well, for the function. But you can see the signs are still there, and that brings me to their project. And before I go on with their project, please allow me to use a little bit of my time to talk about what my projects connects with their projects, because they are finding the gold signs in different parts of Hong Kong. They have very, very thorough documentation of each and every sign, where they find it, their condition and the picture and so on. So I talked to them and asked, have you considered try to visualize them on a map of some sort? So that's what we do. So we have been trying to use geographic information system to present the military history of Hong Kong, especially in the Second World War. So we have been working with many different kinds of geospatial data, like what Ben and Billy did. For example, they were finding the historical data for particular buildings or particular shops in the registration and so on. But the thing is, those records in Hong Kong usually starts from 1945. So they didn't cover the war years. And what happened before was there, but not very complete and let alone digitized. So what we are trying to do is to really collect and interpret these different kinds of what we call historical geospatial data from different kinds of sources. For example, aerial photos, historical maps, and lists that contains, say, addresses, entities, names, people's names, and all other types of information. So this is typically a kind of information that we would work on. and it really helps a lot in our projects. For example, when I was trying to focus on the GIS project about the Japanese occupation of Hong Kong, we work with this kind of information. When the Japanese occupied this place, they had a very meticulous recording of every single property they've taken from the British, Americans, or the locals. So this is one of the registration. So it's a list of properties taken by the Japanese. So you have the address, you have the code, you have the address, you have the landlord number, you have the owner. So look at the first line of the owner. It's actually Kaduri family. And then it was the country belongs to, and so on and so on. And they have the description of the physical condition of the building and so on. And next slide would be intelligence reports. So we work with all these different kinds of reports, which contains what we call geospatial data, addresses, which tells who occupied what, that kind of stuff. This was made by the British Army intelligence. And this one is very interesting. The Japanese were being very meticulous and thorough. They kept a phone book published in 1944 of all the properties occupied by the Japanese for different purposes. So the entities and their numbers, etc., etc. So this is basically a list of shops that are related to the Japanese. You have names, phone number, and the address, including, believe it or not, comfort stations. So they basically packed everything inside this book. Anyway, so what we do is to, and we also have this kind of stuff, trial records. When after the war, when the British really rounded up the war criminals and have all these records. Oh, don't mind that page. Okay, look at the right page, the page on the right-hand side. It was the trial record. So they will question the witnesses, they will question the criminals as suspects and so on. And those accounts also contains lots of geospatial information as well. So what we did is we tried to digitize these things quickly. So we sort of developed a semi-automated workflow. So we start with OCR. Of course, we scanned the page. And then we use a multimodal AI. In our case, we use, very simple, we use Vertex AI in Google Colab to do the OCR and have them structured into a database. And the next step would give them a geospatial location using geospatial coding. And next step would be something like this. And we try to georeference all these historical maps and aerial photos on a 3D GIS. So in our case, we use ArcGIS, and we also recommended Billy and Ben to use the same system. So we didn't use Google Map because I'm not good at coding. So I just used a software called ArcGIS. And these are really, really important because when we have all these geospatial data, they appear as points on the map, just like the gold signs, they're points on the map. But then we try to put them in a more specific geospatial context. So the only way we can do it is to sort of recreate the urban space of the period I study, which is the Japanese occupation of Hong Kong. So that's what we did. We put all these data in a GIS and then overlay it with aerial photos and historical maps so that specific buildings and shops and so on can be seen on the screen in a fairly easily navigable way. Oh, by the way, we will share with you the QR code. You can have access to this after the talk. And then you definitely know where it is.
Does anyone recognize this neighborhood?
This
This is us. This is where we are. Flip it
right
around.
here. So back then, Taikoo was a dockyard plus a sugar factory. So the red line is Penhoi Street, and we are right there. So this photo was taken by the U.S. Army Air Force on the 1st of February, 1945. So it was super high quality. So you can magnify it many times and still see. And after using georeferencing, we can very easily overlay different aerial photos and maps so that we can really just like you walk on the streets and see the different layers of Hong Kong history. For example, maps. By the way, this place was one of the places where the Japanese forces landed on the 18th of December 1941. So back then, we created a map about this. Back then, there were around 1,000 Japanese troops landed at the same time. So it was quite crowded by then. Anyway, heavy fighting was there. And next step would be after the Japanese landing, they occupied the place. Of course, it was under Japanese occupation. The shipyard was used by the Japanese as a shipyard. It was controlled by the Japanese Navy. Mitsubishi took it over to run the place. And there was a school up there on the hill. It was the garrison of the Japanese Marines. So, but the place was bombed several times by the US Army Air Force. So last year, we went to Maxwell Air Base to retrieve these photos. So taken by the US forces when they were actually bombing the place 80 years ago. The day was taken was 2nd of April 1945 at 2:20. So many of the bombs just dropped into the sea. But by then, the place was heavily damaged anyway. So we have all these geospatial sources, and then we try to use a more effective way to visualize them. And then we share our experience with Ben and Billy so that they can organize the ghost signs in a different way. And also in the process, we can also use these sources to look at many different dimensions of the wartime experience or any historical experience that are sometimes overlooked by many. For example, you probably have seen this if you hike around the hills nearby at Quarry Bay. So there are many, many of these communal kitchens. Have you seen this? You probably have. So that previous picture was the original look of these communal kitchens. And now they were, well, all the chimneys fell down and only the stove were left. And this particular story was almost never talked about in official war diaries, etc., because they focus on only the fighting parts of the story. But so many different social history and so many different people's experience were left in the mainstream sort of historical accounts. So that's why I found Billy and Ben's project very, very important in that they sort of captured the many layers of lives of the people in Hong Kong and the diversity of those experiences and the many, many things that influenced Hong Kong. So
For those interested as well, this is about a 20-minute hike from here.
Oh, yes. Very
So
close.
just up Man Parker Road, around the corner. You can go up and walk through here. I take our foster dog for walks through here 3-4 times a week. They're very, very cool to see.
Yeah. The reason the British built this was because of an obvious reason. You have to defend the city against a Japanese onslaught while at the same time taking care of more than 1 million civilians. So they have to do something. So that was, but there were many of them if you look at the aerial photos. Yeah, anyway. So let's continue. So this is one of our pet projects. We are overlaying 1963 aerial photos of Hong Kong, and we are also placing all we have about the Japanese occupation in it to see all these buildings, whether they still exist 20 years after the war and so on. So this is many, many layers of urban development of Hong Kong. And the interesting thing is it really overlaps with Ben and Billy's work.
Yes, so this is the intersection between Dr. Kwong's work and ours, because talking about what we had collected, this is essentially, at that point in time, maybe 2-3 years ago, all the ghost signs which we had found on the Kowloon Peninsula in this very distinctive V pattern. Now, of course, we haven't walked everywhere, but we've covered a fair amount of ground. And then when we talked, we were shown this map, the previous map, of basically the rate of development on the Kowloon Peninsula, and they exactly tracked. It's the same rough V formation. Of course, people start to industrialize and settle along the coast. And so, of course, that's where we're going to find signs which they left behind. So we realized through talking that actually, as well as documenting signs, we're documenting a little screenshot, a little snapshot of Hong Kong's history from 1945 to around 1990. And it's not glamorous things and not so-called important things. These are things and people who wouldn't otherwise leave any kind of mark in history at all. Because to leave a mark in history is a privilege, and it's usually reserved, for the wealthy, the famous, the noteworthy. They're not reserved for the people who run butcher shops and car repair shops or laundries, not for ordinary people. But by writing their signs and just by virtue of having those signs left behind, we have a record of them, and we have a record of who was there and what they did. And this is the true value of Hong Kong ghost signs. And we can really benefit from the information which is given to us by the work of Hong Kong Spatial History, because we have 300 data points, but you have how many?
Currently around 7,000, more or less. So I think, but what Billy and Ben's work is important is that they preserved a usually overlooked layer of Hong Kong history, because, well, the government really concerns all these historical buildings, but they are usually very old. And then during the post-war development, things changed so fast that layers and layers of things would be demolished. For example, the first 2 generations of post-war buildings were already demolished. Those built 40s to 60s, demolished. In the 60s, 60s to 80s, they are now being demolished nowadays. For example, many of your signs appears usually in the 70s, and they're already gone. So I think this work is very important in that it really preserves a layer of social history in a rapidly changing urban environment that is very difficult to preserve. Yeah.
Now, one thing that we found, which is quite remarkable, is we've actually been able to locate some of the people who wrote some of these signs. Now, the way that sign making in Hong Kong works, it's very distinctive. It's not at all like the European or American or British mode. It starts, of course, with a calligrapher. And when these types of signs were being made, they were most often written by individuals like this. They would simply set up a table on the street. There might be 2 or 3 of them, and they would probably write all the signs for that neighborhood, because it was a time when very few people were literate, and even fewer people could write beautifully. So if you can imagine it, an entire neighborhood would be characterized by the handwriting of 2 or 3 individuals. And these 2 or 3 individuals would quite often sign their work. And so quite often you can see their names written there, like this gentleman, To Wa On, who's most often found around Kwong. But in this case, with this auto glass shop, which no longer exists, he did some work in Tai Hang. We've been able to locate these people. It's not as far back as you might think. That photo farthest from me, that was taken on Argyle Street in Mong Kok in around 2016. That stall of 2 or 3 signwriters has been cleared now, but it's very, very recent history. This man in the photos closer to me, he's actually writing signs for my company to make into stencils, another specialty of Hong Kong. So, it all starts with a calligrapher. And sometimes, very rarely, we'll find illustrated signs in Hong Kong. We don't find many because I think it would be more expensive, and that's the reason why Hong Kong is a very practical, pragmatic place. But where there are illustrated signs, they would be done by people like this gentleman here, whose name is Jimmy Kwong. Jimmy started his life working at around 13 or 14 years old. And what he used to do is he used to paint billboards for cinemas, because right up until the 90s in Hong Kong, a lot of cinema billboards were hand painted, wonderfully. And it's not just niche history, it actually crosses over into what we might consider to be main history. So Jimmy worked in a studio called Peacock. And Peacock was one of maybe the 4 or 5 companies that used to paint all the billboards in Hong Kong. And then they would moonlight painting signs for people. And by some amazing coincidence, I actually met another man who did the exact same work. And then I asked him, oh, so which studio did you work at? And he said, I worked at Peacock. And then I asked him, well, did you know Jimmy? And he said, of course I know Jimmy. And I said, because Jimmy had said that I don't think I ever painted any signs. So I asked him, like, did you and Jimmy ever paint signs together? And he said, yes, of course. I used to pay Jimmy to paint signs all the time. I think we must have done around 2,000 signs. So Jimmy's memory is not so great, but this elder apprentice brother of Jimmy's, it turned out that what he'd done with his experience painting signs was he went on to make sets for television, for TVB, and then he went on to make sets for cantopop music videos. These are exports from Hong Kong, the film industry and the music industry, which have had disproportionately huge impacts on the world stage, disproportionate to the size of Hong Kong and its population. And as if that wasn't enough, this man went on to become a stage designer of great renown, so much so that in 1996, on the approach to Hong Kong being brought back to Chinese sovereignty, he was approached not just by the British but also the Chinese to make the backdrops for the 1997 handover ceremony, because the task was so daunting that nobody else dared take up the role. So this man did it for both sides. Conflict of interest be damned. Like a boss. And like a boss, he tackled the problem like nobody else would have. He had to change that backdrop over within 6 hours. The British would do their ceremony, it would be all British, and then they would go. And then within 6 hours, it had to be Chinese. So how would somebody do this? How was somebody to put up an entirely new backdrop? But what he did was he built the Chinese one first, and then around it, he built the British one. And then, when the ceremony was done, they came in and they dropped the entire facade, and they took it away, and then the Chinese one was revealed. It's genius. And so it's the genius of the sign maker, and these people are the same people who have written all over our cityscape. We can also see, their skill in writing, and we've touched on calligraphic scripts, but the other thing which is captured in ghost signs as a little snapshot are little used, rare, or lost calligraphic scripts. Now this man, his name is Yuan Kai, and if anybody here has seen a truck in Hong Kong, and I'm sure you have, most likely you've seen his writing, because he is an expert in a kind of script called Beiwei, Bak Nai, which was very popular in Hong Kong between the 60s and the 90s because it's extremely charismatic and bombastic. And if I were to use 2 adjectives to describe Hong Kong, I would use those, charismatic and bombastic. And that's what this script is. And that's what people want their company sign to say about them, including this barber shop in Causeway Bay, which is called Hollywood Barber. So it's not modest about itself. And it's using a really nice Beiwei script. Talking to people in that industry, we were able to find out a little bit about it. We've surmised that, once again, it is a Shanghainese establishment because there were many Shanghainese barbers. And we can tell this, or we can guess this, probably because there were a lot of Shanghainese-oriented businesses in Causeway Bay at the time, nightclubs and restaurants and such. This place, however, it now actually cuts dogs' hair. It's now a dog groomer's. So sometimes the history and its symmetry is very pleasing. And we can also track the evolution of society or political evolution in this place. So, for instance, this gigantic tobacco ghost sign, this sign for Good Companion cigarettes, a British American tobacco brand. This was actually the first ghost sign which I found. It used to be that tobacco ads were all over the city. You couldn't go anywhere without seeing a cigarette ad. And they're now mostly gone. And unusually for ghost sign people, we're actually celebrating the person who destroyed the signs. We're actually able to locate the one person or the one individual who played a huge role in getting rid of these signs. And that's this lady, Dr. Judith Mackay, who is, to this day, an anti-tobacco lobbyist. She advises the WHO. She basically goes around the world and tells people how they can get rid of cigarettes and how to get people to quit. And one of the things which she did was she got rid of tobacco advertising in Hong Kong. So pre-1998 or 1999, cigarette ads would have been the status quo. And now we basically don't see any unless they're ghost signs. It is a sign of how pernicious that industry is and how tenacious and how it's always lurking there. I mean, take a look at this image which was provided to us by Dr. Mackay at the top, and then the image below of Sai Kung Town. From 86 to 2022, it's a marked difference, and also an unexpected source of information. Dr. Mackay, we visited her in her home, and we talked to her about what we're doing. And she said, "Oh, you like that? Well, here, I've got this." And she brought out a 4 terabyte hard drive full of photographs which she had taken of signs which she wanted to kill, like a hit list. Because this woman is intense. And this is essentially a map to us. If we can see a photograph of where a tobacco sign once was, and if that building is still standing, and if we can identify it, we can go there and we can find the remnants of that sign and photograph it. So there's no telling where this information will come from. It's amazing. Oh, and look at this giant sign for Kent. You'll see that if you drive down Gloucester Road in the direction of Central. Drive carefully though, please. Yeah, and then we also see images like this going up towards Park View. If anybody's been here long enough, you'll remember the flower emblem of the Urban Council, which was pretty much like the mayor's office of Hong Kong at one point in time, right up until 1999. It used to look after rubbish collection, beach cleanup, hawker centers, museums. It is the reason why Hong Kong has its own Olympics team. And it had this wonderful modernist logo, which was so ubiquitous. And this final version of it was actually designed by this lady, Rebecca Lee. And as if being an amazing graphic designer wasn't enough, she also did the logo that we see everywhere on the street for China Light and Power. This lady is the first Hong Konger and first woman ever to have summited Everest, been to the North Pole and Antarctica. So it goes to show that if you are a graphic designer, you are pretty much capable of doing anything. But she wasn't the only one who touched this logo. So the way it started its life is it was an armorial badge, the one that you see at the bottom there, designed by the College of Arms in London. Amazingly, I was able to just call them one day, and this nice lady, picked up the phone, and I explained I wanted to know about the Urban Council's armorial badge, and she said, "Yes, dear, of course." And is there somebody I can talk to? And she said, yes, I think Dennis knows something. And she just put down the phone and went, "Dennis, there's a man from Hong Kong. I'd like to know about the Urban Council." And he came right on the phone and told me all about it. And then from there, I was able to track down the man who was to update this armorial badge into something which we recognized in the end. and that's Kantai Kung over there, who is a graphic designer of great renown. His work is likewise everywhere in Hong Kong, but what we're focusing on here is his work for the Urban Council and his first stab at making it into a modernist graphic design rather than an armorial badge. So we can see that we pass through graphic designers of great note, government bodies of great note, changes in policy, and we can also see wholesale change in entire neighborhoods. This is Tai Hang over here. It was once a working class neighborhood, rapidly gentrifying. If you take a look at that bar there, Buddy Bar, that's a relatively new addition. But above it is a very roughly painted sign for a car body works shop, because that's what the neighborhood used to specialize in. It used to have a lot of garages. It used to fix a lot of taxis. But as you can see from the two gents walking down the street there, they probably don't work in a garage, and they probably don't drive a taxi. They're probably on the way to a nice coffee shop or a nice bar. And these ghost signs are just a record of how these neighborhoods change, including this one, which we're sitting in now. Ben, do you want to take this one?
This is a ghost sign that revealed itself as the buildings across the street were taken down. This was spotted in, I think, October last year. On a Sunday morning, I was taking the dog for a walk, and I looked over and saw this peeking out on the side of the building. Quickly took a picture, sent it to Billy, said, we got to figure out what this is. And he sleuthed it and figured it out. And this was an advertisement from the developer of this building. This group of buildings that were all alongside here on Panhoy Street. And as he built out from, we'll say, Tai Koo to Kings Road, when he finished this one, he slapped up a big advertisement encouraging people to come rent or lease out the building. This was in the late 50s. Within a year, the building adjacent to it was put up, and it covered it up. And so this was hidden for over 60 years. Go back to October 2024 or so, and as they were taking down the buildings, they started on Kings Road and moved their way back and ended up exposing this sign for 2 weeks. This was visible for about 2 weeks. I quickly, after spotting it with the dog, ran back with the drone and a camera to capture it, and now it's gone. And it was beautiful, huge, stunning, colorful, as if it was painted yesterday. And to be able to capture these stories is one of the great joys of what we're doing and what we get to do. That this speaks to Hong Kong's development and redevelopment in the neighborhoods here as a means to, not to comment on gentrification or whatnot, but to celebrate these stories that emerge, and sometimes for just little bits at a time. I can't think of the name of the developer. I'm sure you know, Zhong Kei, which is known because they were also the developer of this building, which is 100 meters down the road, affectionately known as the Monster Building or the Transformers Building, a very Instagrammable place lots of tourists go. And actually, the development company, I believe, lost their money by investing in this and trying to push this forward. And so again, it makes up the fabric of this neighborhood, that while the building across the street isn't there anymore, this one down the way is alive and well, and has stories to tell that beyond just being an Instagrammable site. So where do we go with this? We, as Billy mentioned, we've got 300 or so data points, but there's only 2 of us. There are so many ghost signs in this city. There are so many stories to be told. And we're very fortunate that through generous funding from the Design Trust and the Lord Wilson Heritage Trust, that we are able to deliver talks like this, walking tours, and we're also developing a web app. And working title, Ghost Mappers, that this is an interactive tool that everyone will be able to use to find ghost signs. We've populated it with our database of signs where you can go to your neighborhood, Quarry Bay, Shengwan, Yunlong, wherever you happen to be, to go and find the signs that we've already found and to find some of these stories through it. What it's also allowing is people to contribute to this database and to help tell these stories. There's only two of us. Some signs are up for a week. Some signs are up for a day. Some signs have been up for 60 years. There are lots of stories to tell, and we really want to give that opportunity for people to go out to the streets and find these signs, pin them, drop a pin, take a photo, submit it to us. We'll take a look. Sherlock Holmes over here will figure out if it's really a ghost sign or just the name of the building, as I've learned many times as I've sent him photos. And so an opportunity to learn, to gather, to build this database, to build these records and these stories. Eventually, we're going to look at seeing about, crafting tours that people can go and walk around neighborhoods, stop in at a local cafe and shop and enjoy and really celebrate this great city and to celebrate Hong Kong and its history. And kind of going full circle, that's what it comes back to for us. Going from street photography to city historian, but to tell the stories of those whose stories are not told anywhere, they're not written down. So this is the Jung family that ran that hardware store, one of their Mid-Autumn Festival barbecues that I was so incredibly privileged to be invited to and to join them. And this is their story. This is part of their legacy and the work that they did to make Hong Kong their home, to raise their family, to make it a vibrant community, to provide services, to really build a community here. And these are the stories that the three of us are very fortunate to be able to tell. So we encourage you to check out our work. Follow us at HK Go Signs. Check out Kwong's awesome 3D map project. Play around with it. You can zoom in all around and click on points and dates. It's absolutely fantastic. But yeah, we encourage you to learn more about Hong Kong, learn these stories, and to share these stories with us. And so with that, we wrap our portion of it. We want to thank you all for coming. If anyone has any questions, please throw them our way.
Hi. Thank you. That was really fantastic. All parts. A 2-week gap is a really close call with the Junkei sign. Were there any other notable close calls that you want to share, or heaven forbid, ones that you actually missed?
I would argue the ones we've missed we just don't know about. So yeah, there might be some. One was the example of the car that smashed into that building and destroyed one ghost sign while revealing another. The other is, just the challenge and the changing nature of the city. I do, when I have time, a fair amount of street photography, and so spend a lot of time. This is my neighborhood. I live in this neighborhood. I've been here 6.5 years. I've probably walked every square foot of this neighborhood. And so to be able to see those changes and those shifts is very apparent to me, but this is one of many neighborhoods in Hong Kong. And so that's why we're very keen, and part of our proposal was to democratize this type of project and put it out to the people, and to have ghost hunters across the city being able to capture these things that, Billy mentioned early on. Is the Jumbo Stein still there? We're not sure. We just haven't had a chance to go out there yet. So there's lots, it's a constantly transitioning thing. And we're hoping that by reaching out to members of the community that are also interested, to start really building this database. Oh, you gonna go?
Is there anything that you can do in terms of preservation or perhaps even restoration of some of the really outstanding ones?
Yeah, well, this is very difficult because it's all, well, for the most part, it's on private property. And it's very difficult to explain to somebody that, no, they cannot repaint their building, or they cannot redevelop their building because there's a wonderful sign on it. And it's also very, very technically difficult and expensive to cut out an entire section of wall, which is what would have to be done. If the sign was plastic and or neon or something like that, then it could be collected by somebody like Street Sign HK. But unfortunately, ghost signs, well, they barely have any kind of recognition in Hong Kong. I mean, I only learned about that designation 4 years ago when I read a book from the UK called Ghost Signs, A London Story by a guy named Sam Roberts. So if nobody knows about them, then they're not going to get any sort of protection. But going forward, a very abstract goal of ours will be to make ghost signs or something like them designated intangible cultural heritage. That would be our long-term goal.
Or, of course, if there's any angel investors in the room that would like to finance this work, come talk to us afterwards.
So I'm a bit greedy. I have two questions. One is for Dr. Kwong. Can you talk about how you came to obtain some of those records, like the Japanese phone records or the occupation addresses? The second question is to the designers. Did you find that there were certain fonts or I don't know, serifs, sans serifs that were in vogue in certain periods for the sign design, or it's really dependent on the neighborhood guy who could write and read? And third, sorry, 1880 team, is there any way we can turn up the temperature? It's really cold in here. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for the question. The sources, it's actually very easy to come by because one good thing about the Japanese occupation is that there are many works done on the period, but almost nothing on the spatial part of the story. But on the other hand, the sources are always there. For example, the Japanese phone book is simply in the collection of Hong Kong U. In the Hong Kong collection of Hong Kong U. It's just there. It sits there for many years. And some people consult it as a reference material. The thing is that when historians write stories, we are a bit obsessed with stories. We try to construct a narrative. But when we are doing it, that's how we are trained. I'm a military historian myself, so maybe I'm a little bit more space sensitive because where things happen in the space, battles. But on the other hand, many historians, when they are treating their subjects, they would treat the spatial background simply as a context. So it's not the main character of the story. So when they bumped into a thing like phone book, they won't treat it as a source, they treat it as a quick reference. When they have to read find a particular shop, they consult it. But what we are trying to do is to put everything on the map and see what happens. The others, well, like Airbnb property registration and so on, could be found in Kwong Public Records Office as well.
And a nice thing that you said before was that by visualizing everything that we've been looking at in terms of space and maps, we're actually able to make connections and draw conclusions about space and time and their relationship to one another and events much more easily than you would be able to if just looking at a block of text.
Yes, that's one very big advantage of revisiting those stories and narratives after we have a more concrete spatial context. For example, next to us in Sao Kei Wan, in Sao Kei Wan, that place was actually almost the only place in Hong Kong where you have economic growth and population increase during the Japanese occupation because of some specific reasons. Okay, I won't talk about this I will talk about this later, okay? When we have chance, because I don't want to expand, but yes.
In terms of the fonts, personally, I find the use of the scripts the Chinese scripts, much more interesting because that is mainly what the sign writers are going to be concerned with. It's going to be Chinese forward for them. They're going to do that. And then, bilingualism is a main feature of Hong Kong signs. And essentially, English writing and Chinese writing, they do not go easily together. Like, they do not play well together, and it takes quite a lot of skill to arrange them so that they look good. And so as a result, Hong Kong sign makers have been quite adept at using the characteristics of Chinese and English writing to make these quite remarkable compositions. So Chinese writing can be read right to left and left to right and up and down. And so you see all sorts of amazing choices in terms of text orientation, sometimes even sort of radiating out from the center, which is quite spectacular. So quite often in terms of choosing a font for the English text, and this, I have not come up with this myself. I read it in a book by a signage expert, a Hong Kong signage expert. His name is Lee Kin Ming, and he has a book called Look at Hong Kong Shop Signs. And the thing that he says about it is that the English text essentially should be there and the font chosen so it doesn't interfere with the Chinese text. So they will often go for a very generic sans serif font, like something akin to Helvetica or Arial, but probably not that. And they will just put that there, and they will do all sorts of things to it that a graphic designer would say, no, do not. Like they will stretch it and they will like move it out for the sake of making it go with the Chinese. And a lot of people credit, good job to him, Sammy Orr, for deciding that it was a good idea to have sans serif fonts for English text in the MTR when putting it together with the Chinese station name. That's obviously a very good decision, but it just reflects so well on the sort of normal, everyday Hong Kong sign maker that they knew that the whole time by instinct, just by virtue of doing their craft.
Dr. Kwong made reference to the layering, and in particular that buildings from the 60s to 80s are being destroyed or knocked down now, and buildings from the 40s to 60s have already been knocked down. But I'm curious, as you go and you discover signs, do you occasionally stumble upon older ghost signs, so things that go back far in time, and if so, how far back in time?
Okay, so we haven't had a chance to go over those because we're focused on Quarry Bay, and we have been talking about post-war Hong Kong. However, another way in which we have diverged from our, shall we say, ghost sign colleagues internationally is that we are looking at all sorts of sign which go long before modern history, long before what we recognize as modern day Hong Kong. We're looking at pre-colonial Hong Kong, and a really great example of that would be the sign at Sun Wong Toi, the Sun Wong Toi Rock, which is, for anybody who doesn't know, a gigantic block of probably granite, which was cut out of a gigantic boulder because in the Song dynasty, in 1276 or 1277, two would-be boy kings, the last two of the crumbling Song dynasty, fled down to Hong Kong, which was the most southern tip of their rapidly disintegrating empire. And hot on their heels were the Mongols, hell-bent on destroying everything that they knew. And they arrived in Hong Kong, or what would become Hong Kong, and they sheltered in a little village on the peninsula across the harbor. And the two children, around 8 to 10 years old, two brothers, they do what children do, and they play and they imagine. But these are not normal children. They're emperors. So one of them, probably the older one, saw 8 mountain peaks over the peninsula and decreed, this peninsula will henceforth be known as 9 dragons. And his servant said to him, "Oh, but your majesty, why 9? There are only 8 peaks that you see." And he said, "I am the 9th dragon." And so henceforth, that peninsula has always been known as Kowloon. And so we can see from this, yes, in answer to your original question, we are looking at ancient signs, and they have much influence on the world that we know today.
And so this sign that Billy's talking about at Sungwon Toi is just south of Kowloon City. And to throw in a pitch, this is where we've developed our walking tour. So we have a Hong Kong Ghost Signs walking tour in Kowloon City that starts in the Kowloon Walled City and then goes into Kowloon City itself to talk about the history, the development, the redevelopment, the Urban Renewal Authority, and changing the face of this neighborhood as a means to, again, pull a lot of these stories out to recognize and to celebrate and to honor the legacies of those who are there. So if anyone's interested, I think we still have a few spots left for our one at the end of this month. You can find it through our Instagram account at HK Ghost Signs.
Sorry, can I have one more?
Yes.
When does your research stop? Like, you found for example, the sugar cane shop, and you found that the illustrious history of it being a crazy bookshop back in the day. But are there any scenarios where there's just completely no information, or you've reached a point where, like, I need to put this to rest, or?
Yeah, sometimes there's about maybe 120 or so of the data points that we found. We've been forced to write illegible, and this is, like my shortcomings deciphering like faded out Chinese. Like we left those behind a long time ago. We actually hired a student of Kwong's, and she is actually amazing. She actually was able to decipher things that to us looked like water stains. So she was pretty relentless, and so brought down the number of illegible signs considerably. But sometimes we put it down, and they kind of come up again. So there was a sign in Kowloon City which I was having a lot of trouble figuring out, and it said its name, and then the next half of the sign was completely obliterated. It looked like the contractor who came by afterwards took a stab at getting rid of it and then gave up halfway. Such as Hong Kong construction. And so I had the name of the business, but it was not really a business of much note at all. There was no information about it. And then by coincidence, my friend John Wu, who collects what others would see as trash, but he sees as treasure, and he calls it ephemera. So since, in deference to him, we're going to be polite and call it ephemera. And what he posted was a receipt which he'd collected from 1983. And his interest in it was it's kind of a cool receipt with vernacular Chinese, like Hong Kong design. But what I was interested in was the name on the receipt, and it was the name which corresponded with the sign which I could not decipher. And so you would say, well, like many businesses could have that generic name. Sorry, I can't remember it right this minute. But the great thing about a receipt is it will have details, and one of those details was an address, and that address matched exactly with where that sign is still now. So, sometimes we do give up and then it just comes back.
Yeah, I think that goes with the importance of having some sort of a platform or database. Because back in the days when you don't have these things, you You bump into a very good topic, and then halfway in your research, you are distracted by other stuff, and you give it up. Yeah, many older scholars would tell us stories like this. I really want to work on that, but because of whatever reason, it stopped. But having a platform, you can have many options. For example, it can be picked up by others. Someone can pick it up, continue it, or somehow, just like what Billy said, after a while, you have new evidence, and then you get back to it, and you complete the story. So which is very important, I think, to have all these geospatial data lined up first, and then we can do something deeper in it. Yeah.
Diana, I think you had a question. Yeah.
I can shout. So I understand that when Hong Kong was under Japanese occupation, some of the street names were changed to Japanese. Do you know if they had a logic in terms of translating, or kind of like translating that from English to Japanese, and are there any interesting observations or experience?
Thank you very much for that question, because in our database, when I was trying to do that, I bumped into a source, which is one of the most important source for that project is the contemporary newspaper. You have Japanese English newspaper and Chinese newspaper of the time. So they basically renamed it, not just the streets, they renamed it all the tram stations, all of them. And then it really reads like Taiwanese or Japanese addresses. And they changed the street names, as you said. They also renamed it the districts. So they renamed it the 28 districts of Hong Kong. They divided into 28 districts and renamed it. At the beginning, when I first approached this topic, the Japanese occupation, like 10 years ago or so, when I was writing a book about that, it's only all text without maps. When I was writing about that, I didn't think too much about the naming, the logic of naming those things. So last year, I was finishing this spatial history project, and I placed all the aerial photos and maps and the spatial data, and I sort of revisit the idea of naming those places. I suddenly realized almost all of them had a meaning. For example, in Tsim Sha Tsui was called Minato District. In Cantonese, it would be Chao Kui, Minato. But Minato was actually a harbor in Japanese. So it's harbor district. It's very straightforward. Some of them are less straightforward, but you can guess the meaning. For example, in Hong Ham was actually called Yamashita, Sanha. So the literally is next to Ho Man Tin, the hill. So down the hill, there is a small peninsula, the Hong Ham. So almost all of these districts are named with something related to either its geographical feature or its function. There's only a few districts that hasn't had a meaning, and then they simply stuck a Japanese Jinja Sanse name onto it. There are several of those places where they run out of ideas, so let's give them random Jinja names. Yeah, but many of them actually contains a meaning. For example, in Kowloon City is called Motor district. Motor is original. That means the old Kowloon. So that's where it was known as the Kowloon, and the rest are new Kowloon. So you have all these Japanese ideas. So they planned it to stay. So they actually gave some thought into naming those places. Yeah, it's actually quite interesting, and you can find them on the map. Yeah, try it.
Hello, I have a question here. So I figured from your definition is that a ghost sign is something that we still have access to now. So, because otherwise every sign would be a ghost sign at some point when the business closed down. So, for example, the one next door where it was only available for those 2 weeks and the building is already gone, you have photographs of it, which is fantastic. But how would you categorize something like that, that kind of once was a ghost sign, but we don't have access to it now?
Well, I mean, I think like you, Nick, like when you are one day unfortunately gone, you will still always have been Nick. So like that, the thing is still a ghost sign and always will have been, except for when it was live, for a very brief moment of perhaps 6 months when it was actually advertising the building that it was painted on. Now that it is gone, unfortunately, it's just gone. But for that, it was a ghost sign, and now it just doesn't exist.
So, for example, when your app is up and running, would you have would you remove that from an active list of ghost signs?
No, we would designate it disappeared or no longer there, and that's partially what the app is for, so that when people go there and see, well, the sign doesn't seem to be there anymore, then they can report it missing, and then we might have to verify that. It may be that they couldn't see it, or it might be that it actually went, and that's the nature of these artifacts. They do tend to go, and they tend to change. For instance, one of the earliest signs we found, which is right above the Tim Ho Wan in Sham Shui Po, there is a painted sign on the side of the building, which would have already been a pretty exciting sign advertising the apartments that they were renting out there. It would have been pretty cool already. We would have been happy to collect that. But then we noticed after a huge typhoon that this sheet of paint that the ghost sign had been on just came off the wall and revealed underneath it an even older version of the exact same sign. So that's just the nature of it. Like, it is quite dynamic and it changes all the time. And we're going, in the long term, like over decades, we're going to see the entire nature of ghost signs shift as well, because even as the ones which we have documented and are documenting begin to go, a new version will take their place. So we're actually starting to document, and there are very few of these, but we've got a few examples of Y2K signs. Like, of course, an aesthetic designation that has been made up very recently, but signs from the 2000s are beginning to appear for businesses and what have you from the 2000s, which no longer exist. So it's always going to evolve.
Yeah, if I may add a little bit up, Ben, can I get back a few slides to the one next to us, the Zhengge. Yeah, this one. This one. Even if these signs disappeared, from a historian's perspective, they are very important social history material. Especially, just an example with this case, Zhengge, Huaqiu, Qingyu. The year it was built is late 1950s, right? It was after when those British built Taikoo sugar plants was gone, and with it, the workers' accommodation. So these were new buildings at the time. So the previous development was, well, during the British, under the British, part of the Taikoo sugar factory project. And these were Chinese developers, new Chinese developers trying to build buildings to sell to a Chinese population who are finally able to buy their own flats. So they have to really sell the case through some sort of a nationalism thing, saying that the Chinese loves it. So that's what he was trying to suggest. So it's a very good example or a good primary source for historians of, say, for example, the urban history of Hong Kong, the history of housing in Hong Kong. When in the 1950s, when you have some sort of a rising of the urban middle class who are able to afford their flats, so they would have to choose what to buy, where to live. And then you have all these huge signboards or advertisements saying that, yeah, the Chinese people should buy this. So different kinds of appeal. But look at it. In fact, as housing, okay, as properties, it's not very good. It's not very good property, especially with the monster building. It's monster building. It's not good. It's not a good place to live. But to sell the case, they always use this kind of appeal. In this case, nationalism to an extent. So these are actually very important sources, even though they disappear. So please don't delete them. Please don't. Okay, thank you.
On that comment, it's always very interesting to see the change in perception of the building, because the monster building was, of course, not built to be a slum. It became a slum because Zhongge went out of business, it went bust financing it and bowed out. And so it was then changed from what was meant to be quite, high-class housing to what we see now, which is not particularly glamorous, but it's still home to vast swathes of people, so not to be looked down on. Another one, which would be interesting to look at, would be Chungking Mansions. Chungking Mansions, when it was originally developed, was supposed to be a shopping mall on par with something like Pacific Place. And of course, that's not how we regard it now, but it's very important to remember that things are not always, as they are now. And
the Taiwan building, that was waterfront property. That was primo stuff back in the day.
Yeah, exactly. Is that Ollie? Oh, wow. I recognize you from Instagram.
All right, cool, thanks. Yeah, just on that, with the mention of Chungking Mansions, of the records that you've got, how many ghost signs do you have that are internal? Because much of what we see is buildings that you see from the outside. Is there much internal stuff that you have, and a history of within buildings, especially with one like a storied history of Chungking? I'm sure there's many other buildings that are similar to this as well.
Yeah, we actually have dozens that are inside the building, and that's just the nature of it, because we actually go in to document a lot of shopping malls, which have fallen on hard times. Yeah, we find a lot of.
Tonight, the Taiwan building and the Dragon Center.
Right, exactly. Yeah, the Dragon Center. The Dragon Center is a great example of that. A lot of defunct shops in there with the sign still up. Another good example would be Murray Building. H&M now has a go sign in there. And and that's a sign of how times have changed. Remember when people used to camp out overnight to go shop at H&M, and now nobody cares?
Oh, it's gone. I didn't realize.
Yes.
Selective memory, maybe.
Yeah.
So I think we're probably good. Thank you all very much for your time, for spending an evening with us. We'll be around if you have additional questions you don't want to ask in front of other people. There are photos throughout the space. It's a little dark right now, but if you were to come back at another time during the week, we do have some, there's about 15 photos of ghost signs throughout this space. And we just want to again thank all of you for coming, and definitely the 1880 team for being such amazing, gracious hosts, and for welcoming us into this space tonight. So thank you. Happy Wednesday. And yeah, thank you very much.